Golden Black Live, Kyle Charters, Alan Karpick, you can read. That's why you're here, and we're glad that you're here watching. We have weather to deal with.
Yes.
We sent the whole group out. Brian's on his way to Uncasville, Connecticut via Providence, Rhode Island for the men's games. He'll be covering that tomorrow for Golden Black. The Boilermakers play Old Dominion at noon, ESPN 3. Then, of course, Stacy is making her way across central Illinois.
She's headed straight into it.
Straight into the two teeth of a early, I guess well, it seems like early November snow event. I always want to be in weather, as I say this every time, but this is it'll be interesting tomorrow. Purdue and Iowa, and obviously you've been watching this game closely, and weather will have a factor, but will it really make any difference in your view?
I think it probably helps Iowa. I mean, Iowa's able to run the ball. I think it favors offense at times when you get into really some bad weather because the offensive players know where they're going. And for Iowa, they're going to pound the ball a lot. I think if it turns sort of miserable, they'll pound it even more than that. And Purdue, at times has shown the ability to slow down rushing teams. I think even though Northwestern went for 250 last week, that Purdue, aside from a few plays that they gave up between 20 and 30 yards, really just didn't get gashed. So they were a little bit better last week than the week before when they gave up nearly 400 against Illinois. But, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if Iowa tries to run the ball 55 times tomorrow. I mean, especially if the weather's bad, they're just really going to try and ground it out a little bit, and I think just have too many advantages over Purdue.
Okay, here's how this show works. If you're a first-time viewer, you can send us questions through the chat room. We will take them happily. And if you have questions for us, and we will also be having a special guest too today. Mark Herman will join us at 2:20 for segment 2. Todd Foster, segment 3. And obviously Todd Foster, part of the three-peat teams, and Mark, one of the great quarterbacks in the history of college football, let alone Purdue. So we're thrilled to have them on today. Also, our sponsors, Hilton Garden Inn, State Farm agent Trent Johnson, John Basham, and the good folks at Basham Rental, and of course, Triple X on the hill, but on the level of Purdue tradition since 1929. Since I'm an old man, I like to look back at some of these games that have been played over the years in bad weather. And, since you've been covering Purdue extensively, it's 2004, there really haven't been any awful days. It was cold in Iowa City, I think, in 2008, but no snow to speak of. And yet this will be a real, an event. It sounds like it could be 6 to 9 inches of snow. Amber was talking about in WLFI. That will be a real challenge, especially I think Purdue has to throw the ball some tomorrow, and that makes me a little bit nervous if you've got swirling winds, so to speak.
I think a little bit with how Iowa plays its defense. They're going to play a little bit of a zone. I think David Blau will have some opportunities underneath, which is what Purdue wants to do. I wouldn't be totally shocked, unless it's real windy, and Mark can tell us a little bit more about how the wind affects a football. But unless it's real windy, I think he'll have some success throwing the ball underneath, because Iowa wants to just keep teams from taking a big shot deep. And in fact, talking to who was I talking to?
Now I forgot. Rapids.
Well, he just said that Purdue will probably be able to pick them apart a little bit because
they've had that issue.
Yeah, they've had that because they want to sort of make the team run the next play. Now, what they've been able to do is get turnovers. I think they're plus 11, which is one of the top marks in the country. So
top 5 in the country.
Purdue might be able to move the ball a little bit. The problem, though, is as Purdue has had at times, is turning it over.
Yeah, they've had 3 interceptions taken back to the house. Makes me nervous a little bit from a Purdue perspective. That is a challenge. And they've given up. They're one of the third in the league in rush defense. And really probably one of the better rush defenses in the country in a lot of ways. But the pass defense have given up over 200 yards a game. But again, those turnovers have been absolutely critical. And I think it's defensive coordinators. I don't know if Greg Hudson said that, but they really don't worry as much about passing yards in terms of what that is. I mean, in relative terms, you're going to give those up, and maybe not in tomorrow's game as much. But you buy that theory that
I do buy it a little bit that passing yards. Greg Hudson has said this several times that he just doesn't care much about passing yards allowed as a defensive coordinator. Now, he cares a little.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it's a stat necessarily that automatically equals victory.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't. If you've thrown for 400 yards, it doesn't mean your team has won. It might mean your team was down by 35 points for most of the game. So that was the case. Yeah, that was the case with Nebraska.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of passing yards if the conditions hold up though on Saturday.
You look at what Purdue can gain from the last 2 games of this season, and obviously it's been a long year when you're sitting at 2-8 and have had the proverbial variability of play that Purdue has had. What do you have to gain? What do you think of from a reasonable goal here the last 2 weeks? What do you want, if you're Daryl Hazel, to say after the Indiana game? I mean, obviously you want to win both games, but what do you think as you look forward? Because we know he's coming back, and that's and the staff. Whether the staff's going to all be back is another issue certainly. But
that's the problem. The problem though is that they're beyond the point in someone's tenure when you can lay everything on moral victories, where you can claim moral victory. I mean, you can't in these last 2 weeks, play well at Iowa and certainly lose to Indiana, and even if you do it close twice, feel like you've come away with something. I just think they're beyond that point. Even last week against Northwestern, even though in a lot of ways they played better, they played pretty well on defense, and through 2.5 quarters were okay on offense, though you'd like to take advantage of some of those turnovers and field position that they had. I just don't think you can come away from there claiming really anything.
Yeah.
At this point, you have to win, and it's not going to be easy against Iowa. I think, even though Iowa has not, wowed a lot with their 10-0 mark, at this point, they have a heck of a lot to play for, and I just don't think they're going to be overlooking Purdue, thinking about Nebraska, which I think will be a tough game next Friday, and then looking ahead to the Big Ten championship. I think they sort of know what is at stake from a week-to-week basis, and will come out and play pretty well.
And they still have to win, in my view, stating the absolute obvious. They have to win 3 straight to get to the college football playoff, and they still. I don't think if Iowa can run the table, and that would be assuming a win over an Ohio State or Michigan State team, or possibly Michigan as well.
Or Penn State.
Penn State's still in it.
Penn State's still in it.
That's going to take a lot for them to get it done. But point being is that can change your view. But Iowa's has to win from that standpoint. What do you make of the fact, and you guys talked about it in your radio show, the fact that they have empty seats tomorrow? Kind of interesting. I know the weather's going to impact that certainly, but I know they don't have a very good home schedule. But
I think the home schedule. I think they left last season with a lot of people feeling like Kirk Ferentz was on the hot seat, and a lot of people predicting that they were not going to be very good this year. They went with C.J. Beathard as their quarterback, who, obviously that has been a good choice. Jake Rudock transferred then to Michigan and is playing there and playing well. So it's not, apparently they didn't have bad options. But I just think a lot of people weren't anticipating this season from Iowa. They were tired of Ferentz, even though he's had a very good tenure there. And the schedule didn't help either. And I guess there'll be, 63,000 in Kinnick Stadium, and I think it seats
just over 70.
Yeah, so there's going to be 6,000 or 7,000 empty seats there.
Well, and that's been an interesting phenomenon. And people always assume that you start winning and everybody comes back immediately. It's hard to walk up 5,000 extra people even for games. And in the world of high definition, and in the world of a 27-degree, 25-mile-an-hour wind, 9-inch snowstorm, there may be some people staying home tomorrow. I don't know. And Purdue certainly saw that at Michigan State.
It'll be warmer inside your house.
Yeah, yes, and it will be in West Lafayette too, though it's not supposed to be all that great from that standpoint. You look at also the rest of the the Indiana, obviously, as we talked about in the radio show, plays Maryland this week. The Hoosiers are 0-4 in their division, and yet make that 0-6 in their division. And yet have come about it a very different way. We obviously we won't have a show next week leading into the Indiana game, but that is a game Indiana can score, and the Indiana-Maryland game will be an interesting one in College Park.
Yeah, it will be. I mean, I think Indiana has an opportunity still to get to 6. I know Maryland's favored in that game, but if I'm Indiana, I'm feeling pretty confident with the moral victory, I guess, last week against Michigan. They can move the ball, they can run it, they can throw it. They can't play a whole lot of defense, but sometimes you can just outscore some people, and I think they can outscore their last 2 opponents. they can against Maryland, and it seems like they probably can against Purdue too. I mean, it would set up an interesting game, at least for some people, next weekend if Indiana is able to win tomorrow.
Yeah, Nate Sudfeld and Jordan Howard are the real deal offensively. A name that Purdue fans don't like to hear. Simi Cobbs also has had a very good season at Red. And Indiana's defense isn't I don't think is as bad. I know they gave up 48 points to Michigan in double overtime. Not as bad as some people want them to believe.
I think it's intriguing to see what Indiana does with Kevin Wilson because they are competitive. And
absolutely.
And they're competitive in a very difficult division of football anywhere to win in.
Yeah.
And if you make a change, what does that give you? I mean, you'll be making your what? How many changes now in the last 12 years that you will have made, and I don't know what, that just sets you back again.
Yeah, it goes from Jerry DiNardo to Cam Cameron, or is it backwards? You got, and then obviously, and I'm drawing a complete blank because Mark knows who he is from Butler, that Billy Lynch to Wilson and what's
Hepner's in there,
and Terry Hepner obviously in there. So that and Terry Hepner obviously had some success leading into before his untimely passing. But yeah, I would tend to agree. I think the only thing that's interesting about Kevin Wilson that really is kind of a strange situation is the fact that Wilson seems to be, at least in some circles, not very well liked. I don't know why. I don't know if that's media driven. I'm not sure where that actually comes from. You hear that from Indiana people, and yet I couldn't agree with you more that they are competitive. He's gotten them to a certain level, and not to diss Indiana, but I don't think the program historically has had a hard time keeping itself at any level of consistent decency, maybe with the exception of a few years under Bill Mallory in the modern era. So I mean, I just don't know what you're looking for.
If you're a fringe guy though, and you don't have any friends, that's not a good combination.
Yeah.
Because if they're looking for an excuse to get rid of you,
yeah, I don't know if that's absolutely reality. That's what you hear some, and whether that's reality, they can be fun to watch, and they do get up and down the field, and Purdue will have its hands full next week, the day after, 2 days after Thanksgiving, when that comes to pass. Let's take a quick look at men's basketball. Obviously, Brian will be doing the coverage. Purdue plays Old Dominion on at noon tomorrow, ESPN3. In fact, I guess if you're locally, we asked Purdue Athletics to talk about the fact it's on radio here locally. Also streamed at PurdueSports.com tomorrow. Then, because you're going head-to-head with the football game, but then 5:30 if the Boilermakers win on Sunday, noon if they lose, and either against St. Joe or Florida. You were seated next to me after for the North Carolina A&T game, and we've been watching this basketball team closely. Your early impressions from what you see so far?
I like them. I mean, I'm interested to see when they're challenged a little bit, because you have 22 turnovers, yet you still score 90-plus points, which is a little bit difficult to do, but impressive to do in some ways too. I'd like to see against better opponents, whether they're able to hang on to the ball a little bit better, and if they don't, what kind of problems that creates for them. Because it's a little bit concerning because a lot of those were, sort of some careless turnovers. I thought
they were sloppy. I think against Incarnate Word. But they, against Vermont, I think they were down to 5 or 6 turnovers, and Matt Painter said after the game, not sure exactly what to make of that in terms of that.
I was a little concerned that A.J. Hammonds would be sleepwalking a little bit through the first part of the season, and he wasn't.
No.
So, I thought that after, his 2 games on the bench that, maybe he'd come out and look a little bit too much like he did at the beginning of last year and just sort of be going through the motions, but that's not the A.J. we saw. We saw the one closer to the end of last season. I think that was pretty positive too.
Yeah, good signs too. Certainly that obviously Caleb Swanigan is as advertised, with little doubt there. And Dakota Mathias and Kendall Stevens have actually been shooting the ball very well. It's going to be interesting to see, and we'll certainly ask this question to Todd Foster and Mark Kermanek. He's a state champion high school basketball player, so he knows his way around hoops. But about what you see on perimeter defense, that's going to be an interesting story, because you look at Purdue and you say, well, boy, you have some length. Do you have enough speed to stay up with this? I guess it's going to be a matchup type game in terms of how, which teams
Yeah.
will give Purdue trouble.
Yeah, that is a little bit. Defensive speed, I think, is a little bit of an issue. Even Rayfeld Davis, I think, although a very good defender, has a little bit of trouble keeping, really speed type guys in front of him. I do think, though, the one thing that we thought was a concern before the season that with the development of Vince Edwards has been answered a little is that Purdue does have a guy now in Vince that can penetrate into the lane a little bit and, can sort of, bust a zone a little by driving into the lane. Now, can he get all the way from the three-point line quickly enough into the hoop? I think we saw him try it once against A&T, and he didn't quite get there, but got fouled. But he can get down to 8 to 10 feet and sort of penetrate his own defense and
Ray can do
and
that.
Ray can do it too. But
time, yeah.
your real question was whether they had any speed on the perimeter to be able to get all the way to the rim, and at least Vince, with the improvements he's made, has shown that he has some ability to get in the lane.
Yeah, one thing is for certain, it's been a lot of fun to watch, even against three opponents that really are not up to Purdue speed, and the exhibition game. People are coming in terms of fans. They're filling the seats. That's a good thing, and I think you have some terrific Big Ten matchups to come. Unfortunately, Indiana won't be one of them at home, but you think about those last couple games against from February 9th on down. You got Michigan State, you got Maryland, you got Wisconsin in there, but the Big Ten really is going to be a war. We do have a question here, and this is skipping back to football. This is such an easy question for us to answer. Do you anticipate Purdue football having new coordinators next year? I'll start, but let Kyle. Who knows on that front? There's been a lot of talk about that. Certainly, from a production standpoint, the offense has not gotten the job done over the last 3 years. That's a fair statement. Whether it's all tied to John Shoup, probably not. But
I think
expect it to happen.
I think that there's no doubt that the coaching staff makeup will look different next year.
Whether
it's guys leaving or guys being asked to leave or reassignments or whatever, I have very little doubt that will happen. Now, how much will it include the coordinators? I don't know. It's been speculated a lot for weeks now, and they have on each side of the ball have had their struggles. I think particularly on the offensive side and just sort of creating an identity, and that's a problem when you're in the third year of your tenure.
One thing I will say about Darrell Hazel, at least from what we watch, and whether that's absolute reality, he's a very loyal guy, and I think it's hard for him to make any moves. But I also think there's no question that this program has to find a way to move forward and get back to being relevant in the college football world, and the sooner the better for Darrell Hazel.
I think Darrell's confidence has not wavered, at least outwardly. It has not. He believes in the plan that he has set forward. He believes that they are headed in the right direction, and he thinks that it has been, for the most part, some execution mistakes, some little things that they're doing here or there that is keeping them from being successful. And since he believes all those things, I don't think in his mind he feels like they need huge sweeping changes. That does not mean there won't be.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, and you're right about that. I think in the midst of a very difficult 3-year tenure to date for Darrell Hazel, you have to give the man credit for hanging in there and keeping that positive face moving forward. It would be a lot more positive, obviously, if the Boilermakers can find a way to, as Kyle says, not a moral victory, find a way to pull a shocking upset, which would probably be the biggest upset in college football this year if Purdue could win at Iowa, but then finish by beating Indiana as well. It'll be interesting to see how close the Boilermakers come to getting that to happen. So, Kyle, your time is done. So we're going to bring Mark Herman out for segment 2, and please stay tuned take a 2-minute break. Go get your beverage of choice. It's only 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so it should be a Coca-Cola or a root beer from Triple X, if even better. We'll look forward to having Mark join us here in a couple minutes on Gold and Black Live.